Let's move on to another piece you actually wrote for Rolling Stone, your first one for Rolling Stone a couple weeks back. And it's still about Republicans, but it's about Republicans and how they're literally trying to take food out of your mouth, Katie. And it's a great piece and really kind of, I gotta commend you. It's like a really brave piece to kind of come forward, and it's something you've done fairly consistently. You know, talking to me about how how you are someone who actually receives SNAP benefits and stuff like that, and you're someone who's getting published in Rolling Stone, and so it's like a Rolling Stone contributor, it can't afford to eat necessarily, and that's something that like a lot of people. I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to go out there and like take away this sort of stigma of people on SNAP, because it's something that no one should be ashamed of at all. It's because the society is really messed up and our wages are so damn low. So tell us about the Rolling Stone piece and how Republicans are taking food out of your mouth.
Sure. Thank you. I want people to know, because you have great listeners and I have great listeners and followers, things are better than they were when I wrote the piece. Nice. But what happened in the intro is certainly exactly what happened. I was working an 80-hour unpaid nanny shift as a live-in with someone I had considered family. Spoiler alert for anyone who's never been poor. The poor get taken advantage of by friends and family all the time. Part of why I started talking about my situation is that it's not actually that interesting. It's super common. But I had moved in with her when I lost 3 contracts in a row last summer. It just happens. And after 15 years of living right on the edge and like barely getting by and working 70, 80, 90 hours a week, 3, 4 jobs, dog walking and bartending at the same time, doing the 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. shift at the airport, $9 an hour is middle management, go capitalism. I just had really like gotten to the point where there wasn't any more wiggle room. And this is something that happens to a lot of people. I'd gotten to a place where an unexpected medical bill that, despite my insurance, because we don't consider dental care to be medical care, even though it's
part of the body. Teeth and eyes, they're completely separate from the human body. They're like add-ons or apps or that you put on like a website. They're completely optional.
Right. If you don't take care of what's going on in there, things will be fine, right? Like there's no worry about infection spreading to the rest of your body. No. So I ended up with a medical bill that was going to be about 1/3 of my income for the entirety of 2015. And there was just nowhere to pull it from. And luckily I live in California in a county that was willing to expedite my application for SNAP. And I spent the first 6 months of, or 5 months of 2015 getting food assistance. And, $140 isn't a ton of money, especially as anybody who's ever really lived on food assistance knows. But it was enough to get me by. It was enough to provide a gap while I was getting on my feet. It was certainly enough while I was getting undiagnosed, untreated medical conditions I've had forever that now, thanks Obama and thanks California, like I can actually get treated. And that's part of what this year was for me, was to get that together so I could actually be a productive member of society. Republicans, it turns out that when you have a little bit of help and a little bit of a safety net, you can go on to be productive for the rest of your life. But it does take a certain amount of care and logistical challenges. So in June, I was up for my 6-month renewal. You have to check back in. And I'd had a decent May. Anyone who's ever done any kind of freelancing, this isn't just for writing, you'll know that your monthly income doesn't have much to do with your monthly output and work. It has to do with which accounts receivable departments bother to pay you that month. Yeah. So my May made it look like I was doing way better than I was. And I had pulled together like $1,200 in earnings after my self-employment allowance, and I got a letter in the mail saying that they dropped my food assistance to $16. That's a 1 and a 6, which was sort of like, hey, we understand that you're in a tough spot, and we'd really like to help. Would you have changed for a 20? I was like, I just can't even believe that. So I pitched it to Rolling Stone, and they were kind enough to take it. And, this is a situation that the Republicans' long-term plan to quote unquote balance the budget would do to more people. This is not going on for fiscal year 2016. Don't anybody freak out. There is less money going into SNAP and WIC next year, but it turns out that that's actually just because of the calculator that's built into the program. They use things like expected enrollment and food inflation to determine what the funding should be. But the Republicans spun it when they passed their appropriations bill. They spun it as though this drop in food assistance was on purpose. So they didn't actually cut SNAP, but thought it was a good talking point to their funders and their base to say that they had. I think that might actually be worse, that they weren't able to do this thing, but they're bragging that they have. Because it's in their 10-year plan. Yeah. It's in the plan that Paul Ryan has proposed the last 3 years, and then the previous 3 years, and then the one that was proposed this spring when they talk about how to balance the budget in 10 years. They want to cut SNAP and WIC by like $130 billion. And the U.S. Conference of Governors will tell you something like 30 or 40% of the food needs are already not being met.
Right.
So SNAP funding isn't sufficient as it is, and they want to cut it further. And the percentage that they want to cut out of the budget is like unconscionable. It's something like 1/2 of 1,000th of a percent they want to save, 0.0085% in the $3.8 trillion budget. And they think that they just, like, people can just be hungry. Like, that's just fine. And a lot of that, I mean, it's just really, it's frustrating because 14% of Americans are hungry every year, 14%. And that's not because of the economy. It almost never drops below 11%. That's just the number that we've decided as a capitalist society is reasonable for, the comfort everyone else lives in. So this is really, like, as much as it's an indictment on the Republican Party as it now exists, it's also an indictment on our culture that many millions of people are hungry every day, and people just don't think about it.